Marcus Davis was a man with a muscular build, short black hair, and sharp, bright eyes. He was a senior agent at the FBI, one of the elite members of the task force dedicated to combating organized crime and extremist groups. Despite his stern appearance as a security officer, Marcus always maintained a humble, polite, and somewhat reserved demeanor. He was not one to seek attention, preferring to stay out of the spotlight and focus on his work. Marcus had spent many years in the investigative field, dealing with countless complex cases, sometimes life-threatening, yet within him burned a desire to change the world, even though he knew it was nearly an impossible task. He was Black, and he was always aware of the challenges he faced, not only from criminals but also from racism. Every day, Marcus dealt with discriminatory looks in his line of work. He knew that not everyone in the FBI saw him as an equal. Some believed he didn't belong in his position simply because his skin color was different from most of his colleagues. But Marcus did not allow these prejudices to weaken his resolve. He always proved he could do the job better than anyone else. One morning, like any other day, Marcus was preparing for an important meeting at the FBI headquarters. The meeting's agenda was a large, organized crime syndicate that was lurking in the shadows, having developed a vast network of operations. However, in Marcus's mind, the complex cases couldn't conceal the growing anxiety he felt. A vague sense that something wasn't right lingered in his mind. On his way to the FBI headquarters, Marcus received a call from an anonymous source. A worried, urgent voice on the phone informed him that an attack was being planned targeting influential figures in the security sector, and Marcus might be the next target. He didn't rush, but his vigilance immediately heightened. He ended the call, concealing his concern, and continued driving. In Marcus's mind, caution was never excessive. He couldn't stop thinking about the possible consequences of what could happen next. New York City was where Marcus worked, a multicultural city full of people from every corner of the world. Despite living here for over 10 years, Marcus could never get used to the racism in many forms. Stories about police and people of color were always sensitive topics. Even as an FBI agent, he was not immune to this discrimination. He realized that every day he left his home, he was not just facing enemies from society but sometimes even from his own colleagues. Although he had proven his excellence in his work, Marcus still felt the prejudice in the way his colleagues treated him. Some always cast doubtful glances, not fully trusting the abilities of a Black agent. In important investigations, sometimes he didn't receive enthusiastic support from those around him. They often believed Marcus was only capable of handling small tasks or easier missions. However, Marcus remained confident in himself. He was determined to prove that his talent and loyalty to justice were all that mattered. He knew that no one would protect him if he didn't protect himself. At the FBI, where there was a clear hierarchy and power struggles were never in short supply, Marcus began to realize that the fight against crime was much smaller than the battle against the biases and prejudices within the system he worked in. He started finding ways to work effectively with his colleagues. But at the same time, he felt a loneliness in his heart. The FBI was not always a fair environment. Every step he took seemed to be an obstacle to overcome. That day, an unexpected call completely changed Marcus's life. It was a call from an anonymous source, warning him of a serious threat to his life. The call was brief and filled with urgency. "Marcus, they know about you. They won't forgive you." The words echoed in his mind throughout the day, making it impossible for him to focus on his work. That evening, after finishing his shift, Marcus returned home. He always locked the door carefully, checked all the windows and entrances before stepping inside. However, something felt wrong. He sensed a heavy air, as if someone were watching him. Marcus began to realize that the threat was not just from criminals outside, but from the very people he worked with, those who held power. Sitting in the living room, he listened to every sound outside the door. The feeling of unease grew stronger. He opened his computer and searched for information about similar attacks targeting Black FBI agents. He knew such attacks weren't rare, but he never thought he would become a target. Since the beginning of his career, Marcus had always kept a strong spirit, confident he would overcome any obstacles. But now, he felt fear. A wave of anxiety spread through him, as if something terrible was about to happen. He decided to contact his superiors, but all he received were cold and vague pieces of advice. Marcus began to realize that, in the system he had dedicated so many years to, he might not receive any protection at all. People could turn their backs on him at any moment, especially as he started uncovering things they didn't want to be discovered. That night, while Marcus was sitting in his office, there was a sudden loud banging on the door. He didn't have time to react. The door was broken down, and immediately, a group of white police officers stormed in. They didn't say anything, just ordered him to stop moving and lie down on the floor. Marcus was in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. One of the officers yelled, "Get down! This is a search warrant." Marcus looked up and realized they weren't just regular police officers. They were all dressed in riot gear and fully armed. They searched everything in his house, rifling through every corner without any clear reason. They suspected he was involved in some criminal organization, but they provided no evidence. When Marcus tried to explain that he was an FBI agent, one of the officers smirked and said, "We don't care about your badge. You're just another black criminal." The words hit Marcus like a slap in the face. He felt everything around him collapsing. The deep-seated prejudices of society, the invisible struggles he had faced, now became painfully clear in his own home. The raid escalated when one of the officers violently attacked Marcus. But he couldn't take it anymore. With all the resilience he had, Marcus decided to fight back. He had been trained, and now he had to use all his combat skills to protect himself. A life-or-death struggle began. But Marcus never imagined that this raid would change his life forever. After the police officers stormed into Marcus's home, chaos erupted. The sound of heavy footsteps, breaking glass, and loud bangs against the walls created a tense and suffocating atmosphere. Marcus knew he couldn't just stand there, especially when an officer struck him in the face, leaving him stunned. His vision blurred for a moment, but the pain didn't make him give up. Instead, fueled him. Though attacked, Marcus was not someone easily defeated. He had been trained to handle situations like this. In an instant, he took a step back to avoid the officer's strike, and forcefully pushed a nearby chair into the attacker. The officer fell, and Marcus seized the opportunity. He quickly grabbed the gun the officer had dropped, aiming it directly at his target. "Stay down," Marcus shouted, but no one complied. One of the remaining officers immediately drew his gun and pointed it at Marcus. However, Marcus swiftly kicked the gun out of the officer's hand with a powerful strike. There was no time for thinking, only acting on instinct. A life-or-death struggle was underway. The noise and brutal struggle continued until Marcus found a way to take down the group of officers. He grabbed a wooden staff from the room and used it as a weapon to fight back. He wasn't just fighting to protect himself, but to protect secrets that could shake the very system he had devoted his life to. After a sweaty and bloody battle, the officers were defeated, lying on the floor, unable to resist. However, this victory didn't come easily. Marcus felt sharp pain all over his body, the bleeding wounds on his hands and back still serving as reminders of the brutality he had just endured. He knew that, while he had won this battle, there would be many more challenges ahead, and there was no guarantee that he would survive them. As things slowly calmed down, Marcus couldn't ignore something. One of the officers, as he lay dying, tried to speak. "You don't know. They'll kill you. We're not the only ones." Marcus didn't fully grasp the words, but he could clearly feel that this attack was no random coincidence. There was a much larger force behind it. As the officers lay defeated and the silence finally returned to his home, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The vague words of the wounded officer still echoed in his mind, urging him to uncover the truth behind the break-in. He couldn't believe that these officers would act so violently over something as simple as a suspicion of criminal activity. There was something much bigger being hidden. Marcus quickly went through the documents and evidence in his house, searching for any clue that might help him understand the threat. On his desk, he found a small notebook filled with strange notes about cases he had worked on. But what caught his attention was that some pages had been torn out. Pages that had clearly been removed with great care. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The information in this notebook was not random. It could be the key to unlocking the dark secrets that surrounded his life. He suddenly remembered that, in recent investigations, he had discovered the existence of an underground crime syndicate linked to high-ranking officials within the police force and even the FBI. The sense of unease surged again. The system he had once trusted now seemed to be a place harboring betrayers. He knew that, if he wanted to uncover the truth, he would have to walk a path filled with danger and deceit. In the following days, Marcus could not stop thinking about what had happened. He began to realize that the attack was not simply the work of a group of overzealous policemen, but that it might be part of a larger conspiracy. As he continued to investigate and search for clues, he felt that he was being followed. Although he could not see the stalker, his alertness grew higher and higher. Every little sound, every glance from the people around him seemed to make him feel uneasy. One evening, while Marcus was sitting in his office, he received a text message from an unknown person. The message was short. "They are coming. Don't let them catch you." Marcus did not hesitate. He immediately prepared everything to leave the house. But as soon as he stepped out the door, he was attacked. A group of policemen, this time joined by those who had participated in the previous raid, were standing right in front of his door. They not only wanted to capture him, but also to destroy any evidence that could ruin their plans. This fight was not only about Marcus's survival, but also about justice. He could not let these people continue to commit crimes without being punished. So Marcus did not hesitate to fight again. With his tenacity and sharp intelligence, he defeated his attackers. But he knew that this would not be the last time he faced them. After surviving the second attack, Marcus decided he needed to dig deeper into the case. He contacted trusted colleagues within the FBI and shared the leads he had gathered. Together, they began investigating the connections between the group of police officers and a secret criminal organization. As the investigation progressed, Marcus and his team uncovered a chilling truth. A group of police officers and FBI officials had conspired to protect and assist a large criminal organization, with the goal of manipulating the political and social systems. Notably, this group had been trained to target anyone who dared to stand against them, and Marcus was one of their targets. As the investigation delved deeper, Marcus began to feel the danger closing in around him. The enemies were not only within the police force but also embedded within the very FBI organization he had served for many years. He realized that this was a battle not just against crime, but also against corruption and betrayal within the very system he had once trusted. The next day, as the investigation into the involvement of the police group in organized crime continued, Marcus felt a wave of tension surrounding him. The information he had gathered about the conspiracy involving the criminal organization was no longer a simple struggle, but a war against the very people he had once considered his comrades in the police force. He knew that if he did not act carefully, not only his career but also his life would be at risk. As his colleagues in the FBI were conducting deeper investigations, Marcus was surrounded by unexpected events. One night, while he was working late in his office, the window suddenly shattered, and a bullet narrowly missed hitting his back. Fortunately, he ducked in time and found cover. This attack was clearly a reminder of the danger he was facing. This only reinforced Marcus's belief that the group of traitorous police officers had a vast network with significant influence both within the FBI and in society at large. Specifically, one of the officers from the group that Marcus had previously defeated during the raid seemed to have connections with some political leaders, manipulating key decisions in the country. These individuals were not just ordinary police officers. They had ties to powerful figures in society. people who were always seeking to maintain the system of racial discrimination. Marcus decided to reach out to a close friend in the police force, someone who could help him uncover the origins of this connection. They arranged to meet in a secluded cafe in an alley, where no one knew them. When Marcus arrived, he discovered that his friend had been murdered. On his friend's body, there was a message written in blood. "We will never let you ruin our plans." This message, though brief, was clear, and it made Marcus realize the extent of the danger he was facing. It wasn't just the police, but also those in power in society who were involved in protecting the dark secrets they had created. This network was not just an isolated event, but a deep-rooted system of corruption that had existed for generations and reached into every corner of the government apparatus. As Marcus continued his investigation, he received a surprise call in the middle of the night. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, yet somehow familiar. "Marcus," the voice said hurriedly, "don't trust anyone. There are people within the FBI betraying you." The voice belonged to one of Marcus's old colleagues, someone he had worked with for many years. He was one of the few people Marcus had trusted, or at least, he had thought so. But now, Marcus couldn't help but be suspicious. "We've discovered that some people within the FBI are deliberately hindering the investigation. Some don't want the truth to come out. And if you keep digging into them, they won't just attack you. They'll kill anyone standing between them and power." Marcus's heart stopped when he heard this. Could this colleague be telling him about a conspiracy within the FBI? But when he asked for more details, the voice only said, "Be careful. I can't say more. They're watching me." Before Marcus could respond, the call abruptly ended. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. Another conspiracy was being woven from within the very organization he had dedicated his life to. More than ever, he felt trapped in a labyrinth with no way out. As he thought about how to handle the situation, Marcus realized that he might have been deceived for a long time. Not only was there betrayal within the FBI, but perhaps even the information he had received from his informants wasn't always reliable. He wondered if someone was manipulating him from behind the scenes, trapping him in a dangerous game from which he couldn't escape. As Marcus continued searching for clues, he couldn't avoid facing increasingly powerful enemies. Some of his colleagues in the FBI began to grow suspicious of him. They started scrutinizing his every move, and some even fabricated false stories to harm him. Every step Marcus took was now under surveillance. He knew that if he didn't act quickly, he would never be able to expose the truth. Marcus couldn't face this battle alone. He decided to collaborate with a group of trustworthy colleagues whose loyalty he had confirmed. However, they couldn't act directly within the FBI due to the siege from the betrayers. They had to secretly search for evidence and quietly plan their next moves. Marcus knew that all he needed was undeniable proof to expose the corruption within the FBI and the police. But this wasn't going to be an easy task. The ones behind this conspiracy were too clever, and they would never let that evidence slip out. With the help of his friends in the FBI, Marcus uncovered an important lead: a leaked audio recording. This tape contained conversations between FBI officials and police officers discussing how to protect the criminal group and plotting to kill those who stood up against them. But before Marcus could use that tape, he and his team were attacked again. Gunmen emerged from the darkness and launched an assault. Marcus had to flee, protecting the only evidence he had. After the brutal attack, Marcus knew that without a swift plan for retaliation, not only would he be in danger, but the entire investigation team would be wiped out. He began formulating a plan to dismantle this criminal organization. But it wasn't just about bringing them to justice, it was about making them pay for all the crimes they had committed. He decided to devise a ruse to force the traitors to face undeniable evidence. Marcus and his team prepared for a surprise strike on the criminal organization. They would not only target the low-level criminals but also go after the masterminds, the ones who had created the network of corruption within the FBI. Marcus's plan was risky, but he knew it was the only opportunity to expose the truth and reclaim justice for all the victims who had been oppressed. Marcus had meticulously prepared for the strike on the criminal organization, but he could never have anticipated that things would unfold differently. His team, after months of caution and planning, had finally closed in on their target. However, as they launched their attack on what they believed was the center of the criminal organization, a huge surprise awaited them. As Marcus and his team entered an old building they believed was the headquarters of the criminal group, they immediately realized something was wrong. The enemies were not there. The building was eerily silent, with no resistance that they had anticipated. Everything seemed too easy, until they discovered that it was all a trap. Suddenly, the lights in the building went out, and everything was plunged into darkness. A series of gunshots rang out from all directions, catching Marcus's team off guard. This was not a typical attack. It was a sophisticated ambush that the criminal group had prepared in advance. These criminals were not just ordinary thugs. They had support from powerful figures outside the organization. In the darkness, elite shooters were poised and ready to deal with anyone daring enough to infiltrate their territory. Marcus and his team were forced to split up and figure out how to face each danger. Every step became a life-or-death struggle. Marcus gripped his gun tightly, determined that he would not fail. However, this fight was not just about personal survival, it was about the survival of justice. He could not let these criminals win. The raid lasted for hours. Everyone on Marcus's team was badly injured, but they continued to fight. Finally, in a decisive moment, Marcus broke into the criminal group's command room. However, when he stepped inside, he was confronted with an unexpected sight. The leader of the criminal organization was one of the people Marcus had once considered a friend, an FBI colleague whom he had trusted for years. The person stood before him, wearing a cold smile. "Marcus, you thought you could defeat us?" The person sneered. "We've anticipated every move. You can't win." It was as if Marcus had been awakened from a nightmare. Everything he had once trusted was suddenly shattered. This former friend, the one he had fought beside, was now part of the corrupt network and criminal empire he was trying to dismantle. After the intense confrontation in the building, Marcus successfully captured several key criminals, including the colleague he had once trusted. But even when these criminals were brought to justice, the truth was not always easy to accept. The battle Marcus was fighting was not just against criminals, but against the very system he had served. Throughout the investigation, he discovered that these criminals had infiltrated every level of society, from the police and FBI to high-ranking government officials. Their connections with those in power in politics had formed a solid network of corruption, and breaking it was no easy task. As Marcus presented undeniable evidence of the corruption and crimes committed by these individuals, he faced unexpected resistance from leadership within the FBI and police. Some, even though they knew these criminals had to pay for their actions, were reluctant to acknowledge the evidence Marcus had gathered. These criminals were too powerful, and too many people were protecting them. Marcus was faced with a difficult choice. Should he continue to fight for the truth, or accept that the very system he had dedicated his life to was standing in the way of justice? He couldn't easily give up. He knew that if he stopped, all his efforts would be in vain. In an important meeting at the FBI headquarters, Marcus presented irrefutable evidence of the corrupt actions. In the end, the higher-ups had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. The criminals were brought to justice, and some in the government who had protected them were also investigated. However, Marcus's victory was not easy. He had sacrificed a great deal, and not everyone recognized him as the victor. Nevertheless, justice had been served, and the corruption within both the FBI and the police was finally exposed. Although victory had been achieved, Marcus could not help but feel the emotional scars. From the shocks he had faced throughout the investigation to the betrayal by colleagues he had once trusted, the wounds in his soul could not easily heal. Although justice had prevailed, the cost had been too high. He had lost friends, colleagues with whom he had spent years building relationships. Moreover, the betrayal forced him to confront deep doubt and loneliness. Every night, as he lay down, Marcus could not stop thinking about his wrong decisions, about the people he had trusted, only to be betrayed by them. Yet, amidst the sorrow and loss, Marcus realized an important truth. Justice was not only about bringing criminals to trial, but also about healing the emotional wounds that he and others had suffered. He decided not to let himself be defeated. He had done what was right, and now it was time to heal, to continue living and working for better things. Marcus reached out to the remaining friends he had in the FBI, those who had not betrayed him. Together, they became involved in humanitarian projects, helping those abandoned by society. They rebuilt a community where people could live and work in a fair and safe environment. Although Marcus fought against corruption and secured justice, his life would never return to what it was before. Reintegrating into society, especially in an environment where he had once been betrayed, proved to be a massive challenge. After all he had been through, Marcus understood that change doesn't just come from winning battles. Change begins within himself, from accepting his wounds and learning how to keep living in an imperfect world. He started teaching the younger generation at the FBI the values he had fought his entire life to protect: honesty, fairness, and compassion. At the same time, he also taught himself how to love and respect himself, because he knew that justice wasn't just about punishing criminals, but also about healing the wounds within. Though the past could not be changed, Marcus knew that he had and would continue to fight for a better society. And that was the greatest reward he could ever receive. Although Marcus had won the battle against corruption and crime within the police force, he understood that this victory was just the first step. What he had endured throughout the investigation, the betrayals, and the emotional wounds he suffered could not be easily erased. The fight for justice wasn't only about facing the wrongdoers, but also about how to repair what had been broken. The struggles continued, but this time, Marcus was fighting not just to expose crimes, but to change the entire system. He realized that only when society changes, and when those within the security apparatus are no longer swayed by corruption, could true justice exist. He began to engage with civil organizations, helping oppressed communities and calling for reform within the executive agencies. One of the struggles Marcus became involved in was helping victims of racial discrimination in the justice system, those cast aside by the system, with no opportunity to protect their rights. Marcus not only wanted to help the oppressed citizens but also sought to change the entire way the political system, police, and FBI operated. He worked with civil rights groups, lawyers, and those affected by racial discrimination to create a movement for justice. Protests, workshops, and community meetings became platforms where Marcus could speak his truth, share his story, and inspire change in the hearts of others. However, not everyone easily accepted the changes Marcus was pushing for. Within the FBI and the police, some individuals still held onto their conservative views and opposed the reforms. They did not want to lose their power or position within the system. Marcus faced strong opposition from these individuals, but he was undeterred. He knew that this battle would not end quickly, and sometimes, a great deal had to be sacrificed to achieve real victory. Although Marcus had achieved many successes in the fight for justice, he realized that his career could not continue the way it had been. The trauma and stress he endured throughout the investigation had left deep marks on his mind. Justice wasn't just about solving crimes, but also about acknowledging and confronting the wounds within himself and the system he had served. One day, while participating in a large protest calling for political and police reform, Marcus was injured in a surprise attack by adversaries. Though the injury wasn't severe, the incident made him reflect on the path he had chosen. He had fought for so many years, but perhaps it was time for him to rest, to let the younger generations continue the work he had started. The physical and emotional pain led Marcus to decide to step away from the FBI. He knew he had done everything he could in the fight against corruption and to protect justice. However, the immense sacrifices he had made over the years made him realize that sometimes you can't fight alone. There needed to be a change in the entire system, and he couldn't bear the full responsibility on his own. Ultimately, Marcus left the FBI and returned to a quieter life. He found a new job, one not related to security, but still playing a vital role in education and advocating for justice. He decided to spend more time with his family and loved ones, those who had always stood by him throughout this challenging journey. Although Marcus had left the FBI, his contributions to the fight against corruption and the protection of justice could not be forgotten. His name became a symbol of resilience and courage in facing injustice. He received recognition from numerous civil rights organizations and communities within society. Those who had been forgotten and oppressed found hope and strength to stand up and fight for their rights. Thanks to Marcus. With Marcus's help, civil rights organizations began to gain a stronger voice in society. Protests and advocacy campaigns started to have a significant impact on the policies of government agencies. Although some people in the government and police forces still sought to block these efforts, the pressure from public opinion and the tireless efforts of people like Marcus began to create positive changes. One of Marcus's greatest achievements was the change in training and recruitment systems within police agencies and the FBI. The reforms he advocated helped reduce racial discrimination within law enforcement, creating a fairer environment for all citizens. Although this process of change was slow, the first results began to appear. Marcus had achieved his goal, not only to bring criminals to justice but also to change the system so that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. While the struggle continued, Marcus felt assured that what he had done would have a lasting impact. Marcus's life has been filled with many storms and challenges, but he never gave up on his ideals. Even after leaving the FBI and leaving behind sleepless nights and life-or-death battles, Marcus did not feel defeated. He knew that the path he had chosen was the right one. Every step, whether painful or full of difficulty, was a step closer to a fair and racially equal society. But even with many accomplishments, Marcus understood that his story was never truly finished. Justice is not something that can be achieved in a moment, but rather a continuous journey. Along with his friends and colleagues, he continued the fight for a better society, where no one would have to live in the shadow of discrimination or oppression. In the end, Marcus realized that, in this life, no victory is absolute. We all must continue to fight, not only for what we have achieved, but for what we can create for the next generation. Marcus was not a hero. He was just an ordinary person who stood up for what was right, and that was all he could do. And though this fight has never ended, Marcus understands that he has done what few can do. He fought, demanded change, and made an indelible difference. Marcus's story is not an end, but a new beginning, a beginning for generations who will continue to fight for justice, for a fair and hopeful world.